The ballroom doors locked with a sound nobody noticed. A soft, mechanical click swallowed by orchestra music and champagne laughter. Nobody noticed because nobody was looking. They were all watching Olivia Hayes stand at that podium in her midnight blue dress, 30 years old and already running one of the most powerful defense companies on the continent, about to change everything. Nobody was watching the security guards reposition themselves along the walls with the slow, patient precision of men who had done this before. Nobody except one man standing near the east corridor with a rented earpiece and a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. A man who had spent 15 years learning that the most dangerous moment in any room is always the one right before everyone realizes what's happening. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel tells stories that stay with you. Stories about ordinary people caught in extraordinary moments. About what people do when everything breaks at once. About what it really costs to protect someone. Subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button if you're already feeling it. And drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see exactly how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to that ballroom, because the night is about to go very wrong, very fast. The Sterling Dynamics. Annual Charity Gala had been running for 11 years, and in all 11 of those years, nothing interesting had ever happened. That was the point, really. You rented the Hargrove Grand Ballroom on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower. You filled it with 400 of the wealthiest people in the city. You served food that cost more per plate than most people made in a week. And you called it a charity event while quietly networking your way through every meaningful business relationship in the room. It was theater. Expensive, well-lit, impeccably catered theater. And everyone in that ballroom knew their role. Olivia Hayes had been playing her role since 7 that evening. She stood near the central podium talking to Jeffrey Marsh, the 63-year-old chairman of the Sterling Dynamics board, who had a habit of holding his champagne glass at chest height like a prop and never actually drinking from it. He was telling her something about the quarterly projections, and she was nodding at the right intervals and saying the right things, but her attention was quietly divided. It always was at events like this. Part of her brain was running the room, who was speaking to whom, which investors were clustered together, whether Richard Holloway from Nexus Capital had arrived yet, whether the technical team had finished the final checks on the presentation system. "You nervous?" Jeffrey asked, mid-sentence about something else. "No," she said. He smiled like he didn't believe her. "You should be a little nervous. This is the biggest thing the company has announced since your father." "I know what it is," she said, and her voice came out flatter than she intended. She softened it. "I just mean, I know the material. I've been living inside this project for 2 years. I'll be fine." Jeffrey nodded and drifted towards someone else, the way board members at parties always drifted, like expensive boats with no anchor. Olivia reached for her own champagne glass and didn't drink from it either. The Meridian Defense Array. That was what she was announcing tonight. 3 years of research, 2 years of development, 1 year of classified field testing, and tonight it went public to the people who mattered. Not the whole world, just the right 400 people in this room, the ones with the capital and the connections to understand what Sterling Dynamics had built and what it was worth. The presentation was 40 minutes. After that, the board would open the floor for a private Q&A, and by midnight, the company's valuation would shift in ways that would take the financial press 3 days to fully process. That was the plan. She checked her watch. 8:47. She had 13 minutes before she needed to be at the podium. She decided to make one more pass around the east side of the room. Nathan Brooks noticed her walking before he noticed much else about the evening. Not because she was the CEO, or because she was the most talked about person in the room, or because her dress cost more than his truck. He noticed her because she walked like someone doing 2 things at once, moving through the crowd while also reading it, tracking it, processing it. He recognized that particular kind of attention. He'd spent a long time developing it himself. He was standing near the East Corridor exit with a plastic cup of water he'd gotten from a passing server and hadn't touched. His earpiece was in his left ear. His radio was clipped to his belt. His suit was a charcoal gray he'd borrowed from his neighbor Paul because his own dress clothes were a full size smaller than he was now, and he hadn't wanted to buy a new one for a one-night job that paid $300. $300. That was the number that had gotten him here. He'd done the math 3 different times the week before, standing in his kitchen while his daughter Emma did her homework at the table behind him. The furnace service was coming up. Emma's field trip cost $42, and the school needed it by Friday. He had a gap in his regular contracting schedule, took 2 weeks of nothing between jobs, and the posting through the temp security agency had been straightforward enough. Corporate event. One night, black tie venue. Crowd management, not threat response. Show up, wear the suit, stay visible, don't cause trouble. He'd called his neighbor Carol to stay with Emma, confirmed the pickup time for the morning, and written a note on the kitchen whiteboard. School at 8:15. Performance at 10. I'll be there. Dad. Emma had read it over dinner and said, without looking up from her plate, "You don't have to write Dad. I know you're Dad." "I like being thorough," he said. She'd given him a look that a 37-year-old man should not receive from an 8-year-old, which was the kind of look that communicated volumes about how she felt about his organizational habits. He was thinking about that look when he noticed the first thing. The guard near the service entrance, a tall man with close-cropped hair named Dietrich, according to the check-in sheet they had all signed that afternoon, had shifted position. It wasn't a dramatic move. Nobody in the room would have clocked it. But Dietrich had been standing at a 45-degree angle to the door for the past hour, facing outward, which was the right orientation for crowd monitoring. Now he was facing inward, toward the center of the room, toward the podium. Nathan let his gaze drift without turning his head. Dietrich wasn't alone in that shift. Across the room, near the north exit, Caulfield, another contractor from the same agency, someone Nathan had exchanged maybe 6 words with during the afternoon briefing, had done the same thing, turned inward, subtly. The kind of subtle that would read as nothing to the guests, because the guests weren't trained to notice it. Nathan set his water cup on the nearest surface and began doing what he was good at, which was looking at a room the way a problem needed to be solved, systematically, without emotion, one data point at a time. He counted 6. 6 of the 14 temporary contractors had repositioned themselves in the last 20 minutes, and when he mapped their locations in his head, he felt something cold and specific settle in his chest. It wasn't anxiety, it was recognition. The 6 of them formed an irregular perimeter around the central area of the ballroom, the podium, the demonstration table, the place where Olivia Hayes would be standing in 11 minutes. That wasn't crowd management. That was containment. He reached for his radio and pressed the call button. Unit 7 to Central. Need a status check on contractor team assignments. Static. Then, copy Unit 7. What's your query? Can you confirm authorization codes for contractors Dietrich and Caulfield? I'm getting inconsistent positioning on my end. A pause. Too long. Hold on. Unit 7. The line went quiet in a way that wasn't technical difficulty. Someone had cut the channel. Nathan put the radio back on his belt and stood very still for 3 seconds, which was the amount of time he allowed himself to process a situation before deciding what to do about it. He thought about Emma at home doing whatever 8-year-olds did at 9 o'clock, probably reading past her bedtime with the flashlight she thought he didn't know about, or watching something on the tablet he'd told her to put away an hour ago. He thought about the note on the whiteboard. He thought about $300 and the furnace service and the school field trip. Then he started walking toward the podium. He didn't walk fast. Fast would have been wrong. He moved at the pace of a man heading purposefully from one side of a room to the other, which in a crowd this size was just slow enough to not register. He kept his posture neutral. He didn't look at the 6 men. He watched them in his peripheral vision the way you watch traffic from the corner of your eye. Not directly, but completely. He had maybe 60 seconds before Olivia Hayes reached the podium. He covered half the distance to her when he saw her pause near a cluster of board members, 5 or 6 people. Champagne and side conversations, the kind of comfortable orbit that forms around powerful women at corporate events. She was saying something to a man Nathan didn't recognize. The man was laughing. Nathan adjusted his angle and came up on her left side. "Ma'am," he said, pitching his voice low. She turned. Up close, she was shorter than she'd appeared from across the room. The heels helped, but she was probably 5'4" without them. She had dark eyes that moved fast, the kind that processed what they saw before the expression had time to catch up. She looked at him the way busy, important people look at staff, politely, briefly, with the light already pulling away. "Temporary security," he said. "I need 30 seconds of your time before you approach the podium." Something in his tone made her focus sharpen. Not alarm, not yet. Just the shift of attention that happens when the voice behind the words doesn't quite match what the words are supposed to be. "I have a presentation to—" "I know, I need 30 seconds." She excused herself from the board members with a practiced ease that told him she'd been making graceful exits from conversations her whole professional life. She turned to face him directly. "What's the problem?" 6 members of the contractor security team have repositioned themselves in the last 20 minutes. Their placement puts them in a containment formation around your position at the podium. I can't reach Central on the radio. The channel was cut. She stared at him. "You're sure?" "Yes." "You're a temp?" "Yes." "And you're telling me that 6 members of tonight's security team are not planning to protect you," he said. "No, I don't think they are." She held his eyes for a moment that was longer than it should have been given what he'd just told her, and he used that moment to decide 2 things. She wasn't panicking, and she wasn't dismissing him. Those were both good signs. "Your name," she said. "Brooks. Nathan Brooks." "How confident are you?" "Enough to tell you." She nodded once, tight, the nod of someone absorbing bad information and already starting to sort through it. "Options?" "Delay the presentation, quietly. Create a reason to—" The orchestra stopped. Not at the end of a piece, mid-phrase, mid-measure, the string section just stopped. The sudden absence of music in a room that had been humming with it for 2 hours created a strange acoustic hole, and into that hole dropped the silence that comes right before everyone understands that something is wrong. The ballroom doors, all 4 of them, sealed simultaneously with a sound like file cabinets closing. Nathan put himself between Olivia and the nearest of the 6 men before he'd consciously made the decision to do it. "Too late," he said, mostly to himself. The man who stepped forward from the 6 was named Rourke, though Nathan didn't know that yet. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried in the way of men who are certain of the outcome, wearing the same contractor badge as everyone else in the room, and he had a Sig Sauer in his right hand that he raised with the casual economy of someone who'd done it many times. 400 people went very still. The sound of that stillness, the collective intake of breath that became collective silence, was something Nathan had heard before, in places far worse than this. It never got easier to be inside. "Good evening," Rourke said, and his voice carried without the microphone, which meant he'd practiced, which meant this was rehearsed in more detail than most people in this room were ready for. "Ms. Hayes, your guests have generously agreed to be quiet while we discuss a matter of access to your company's executive control system. Isn't that right?" Nobody answered, which was its own kind of answer. Olivia Hayes stepped forward from behind Nathan. He moved with her automatically, keeping his left shoulder half a step ahead of hers. "Don't," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hide behind a temp," she said, not unkindly, and walked forward until she was standing 3 feet from Rourke. Nathan had to respect the nerve, even while recognizing it as a problem. "Mr. Rourke," she said, and the fact that she used his name told Nathan she recognized him, which meant something he didn't have time to process yet. "You've made a significant mistake tonight." "I don't think so," Rourke said. "You have," she said, "because this presentation was going to show 400 people what Sterling Dynamics can do. Now they're going to watch what we're made of instead. That's a much better story." Rourke's jaw tightened, just slightly, and he raised the weapon another inch. "The access codes, Ms. Hayes. The system goes public in 40 minutes, whether you provide them or not. If you provide them, everyone goes home. If you don't—" "She needs a moment," Nathan said. Rourke looked at him for the first time. Nathan looked back. He was aware, in that precise way that certain experiences make possible, of the positions of all 6 men. Rourke was 2 feet ahead and 45 degrees right. The second man, Hensley, if the afternoon check-in sheet matched the face, was 8 feet to his left. The third was near the bar, 10 feet behind Rourke. The fourth and fifth were bracketing the room's center. The sixth was at the door. He was also aware that the six of them had made an assumption about Nathan Brooks that most people made when they saw a guy in a borrowed suit with a contractor badge and a plastic cup of water. They thought he was furniture. Rourke laughed, short, dismissive, the laugh of a man who finds something faintly ridiculous. "She needs a moment," he repeated to the other five. A few of them smiled. "Son, I don't know who you are or how long you've been doing this, but you need to step back and let the adults—" Nathan had already stopped listening. Tut, what happened next took 22 seconds. He would know because he counted, out of habit, the way he'd learned to count in tight spaces when time was the only metric that mattered. He moved on the word adults before Rourke had finished the sentence, before any of the six men had time to register the change in the air. He closed the distance to Rourke in 2 steps. Not a rush, not a charge, just a controlled and very sudden displacement of space, and the gun was out of Rourke's hand before the man had consciously understood that Nathan's hand was moving, not a grab. A specific calibrated application of leverage to the wrist joint at the precise angle that made holding any object involuntary. Rourke made a short sound and Nathan stepped through, using Rourke's own mass to redirect him into the second man's approach vector. Hensley had started moving. He stopped moving. Nathan didn't stop. The third man, the one by the bar, was bringing his weapon up and Nathan was already moving laterally, the trajectory of the shot intersecting with empty space. And he closed on the third man with the specific unhurried efficiency of someone who had spent years learning that speed was less important than precision and positioning. The fourth and fifth men made the mistake of trying to converge. In a room with 400 terrified civilians, converging toward a single target created exactly the kind of crossfire risk that professional security training is supposed to prevent. Nathan used that mistake the way he used everything, as information. He found the angle that put one man between himself and the other, and he worked from there. The sixth man, at the door, hesitated. That hesitation cost him 22 seconds. 6 men were on the ground, none of them unconscious, none of them seriously injured, all of them very comprehensively neutralized. And the ballroom was so quiet that Nathan could hear his own breathing, which he was controlling carefully because his left side was telling him something unhelpful about the ribs he'd caught on Hensley's elbow. He turned. 400 people were staring at him. Olivia Hayes was staring at him. He looked at his own hands for a moment, then looked up. "Is anyone hurt?" he asked the room. No one answered. "Guests, is anyone hurt? I need to know." A woman in the front cluster shook her head. Several others followed. He nodded and looked back at Olivia. Her expression was doing something complicated. The mixture of shock and recalibration that happens when the situation turns out to be entirely different from every version you'd mentally prepared for. "You recognized Rourke," Nathan said. "How do you know him?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that wasn't fear so much as the specific cold arrival of a very bad realization. "He's not a contractor," she said. He works for us. He's on the internal security payroll. He reports directly to—" She stopped. "To who?" Nathan said. Before she could answer, his radio crackled. Not from the cut channel, from a different frequency, one he hadn't been assigned. A voice came through, measured and calm, the voice of someone managing a larger situation from elsewhere in the building. "Team 1, report. Team 1, we need confirmation the primary objective is secure. Team 2 is already moving on the server floor. Respond." Nathan looked at the 6 men on the ballroom floor, looked at the locked doors, looked at Olivia. The 6 men in this room weren't the operation. They were the distraction. The voice on the radio said it again. "Team 1, report." And this time there was an edge underneath the calm, the kind of edge that appears when a plan starts deviating from its timeline. Nathan turned the radio over in his hand. It was a different model from the ones the temp contractors had been issued that afternoon. Thinner, better ranged, the kind of hardware you didn't get from a staffing agency. He looked at Olivia. "How many floors does Sterling Dynamics occupy in this building?" She was already ahead of him. 12 through 22. Server infrastructure is on 17 and 18. Access? Biometric plus executive keycard, both required simultaneously. She paused. Unless someone already has internal credentials. Nathan keyed the radio, said nothing, just held the channel open for 3 seconds, then released it. The voice on the other end went quiet. Someone smart enough to know that silence from Team 1 meant something had gone sideways. "They'll switch frequencies," Nathan said, clipping the radio back onto his belt. "We have maybe 4 minutes before whoever is running this realizes Team 1 is finished and adjusts." He turned to the room. 400 people in various states of shock, some gripping each other's arms, some frozen mid-step toward exits that wouldn't open. One elderly man near the bar, sitting very carefully in a chair with the deliberate composure of someone who had decided that sitting down was the most dignified available option. "I need your attention," Nathan said, loud enough to carry without shouting. "Everyone is physically unharmed. The doors are electronically sealed, which means they can be unsealed. I need everyone to move to the east wall and stay low, away from windows, away from the main floor. Do it calmly. Help each other." Nobody moved for 2 seconds. Then a woman in a silver dress near the center of the room took 2 deliberate steps toward the east wall, and that single act of motion broke whatever had locked everyone in place. The crowd began to move. Nathan turned back to Olivia. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. Not fear, not relief, something more unsettled than either, like a person discovering that the ground they'd been standing on was a different material than they thought. "You need to tell me who Rourke reports to," he said. "I told you, internal security. The department head is Marcus Grant." She said the name the way you say the name of someone you've trusted for a long time, with a slight involuntary weight that trust adds to syllables. "He's been our chief security officer for 6 years. Is he in this room?" She looked, scanned the crowd moving toward the east wall, the faces, the people. Nathan watched her face instead of the room, because faces told you more than rooms did. "No," she said, and then quieter. "He was here an hour ago. He came over and asked if I was ready for the presentation. She stopped. "He asked me what time I was planning to go to the podium." Nathan didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. "Okay," she said, and her voice had changed. Not harder, exactly. More compressed, like something that had been taking up space had suddenly been reduced to something more portable and manageable. "What do we do?" "The ballroom door. The service entrance on the south side. Is it on the same electronic lock system as the main doors?" "I don't know. Facilities would know. I don't." "Who else on your team is in this room?" "My assistant, Dana. She was near the bar." Olivia looked. "There, green dress." Nathan followed her eyes to a young woman, mid-20s, standing very still against the east wall, with both hands wrapped around her phone, which she was clearly desperate to use and clearly couldn't get a signal on. "We need building schematics," Nathan said, "and we need to know if your IT security team has any kind of remote lockout capability for the server floors." "Dana handles my scheduling, not—" "Does she know this building?" Olivia paused. "Actually, yes. She planned this event, every detail." "Then I need to talk to her." They moved through the crowd, Olivia slightly ahead because people made room for her, which was useful, and Nathan a half step behind and to her left, which put him between her and the widest open sight lines in the room. His ribs were complaining about the elbow they'd met during the confrontation. He put that information in a category labeled later and kept moving. The 6 men on the ballroom floor hadn't been idle this whole time. Rourke was sitting up, cradling his wrist, and watching Nathan with an expression that had moved past anger into something more analytical. Nathan didn't love that. Angry men were predictable. Analytical men were problems. "Zip ties," Nathan said to the nearest guest, a heavy-set man in his 50s with the squared-off posture of someone who'd done military service. "Extension cords, charging cables, anything you can pull from bags or the technical setup tables. I need these 6 secured." The man looked at him for one beat, nodded once, and started moving with purpose. Sometimes that was all it took. Someone just needed to know what to do. Dana Reyes was 26 years old and had been working as Olivia's executive assistant for 3 years, and the thing Nathan noticed immediately was that she'd been crying and had stopped and was now operating on the controlled forward momentum of someone who had decided that falling apart was a problem for later. "I need the service entrance status," Nathan said, when Olivia had brought him alongside her. "South side of the ballroom. Is it on the same locking system?" Dana blinked. Refocused. No. The main doors are on the event management system. They can be locked centrally for fire protocols or security holds. The service entrance is a standard keycard lock. It's not on the same network. Who has a keycard? The catering staff, event coordinator, facilities manager. She hesitated. And the security team? The contracted security team or the house security team? House. Sterling Dynamics has a standing relationship with the Meridian's facilities. They would have issued cards to the house security liaisons this morning. Nathan looked at Rourke on the floor, now being somewhat aggressively zip-tied by the ex-military man and two others who'd volunteered to help. Rourke's team had come in through the temp contractor agency. They wouldn't have the house key cards. Is the event coordinator still in the building? Dana nodded. Melissa Cho. She was in the staging area behind the service corridor when the doors locked. I saw her go in there 20 minutes before. She was managing the AV setup for the presentation. She has a key card. Yes. How do I reach the staging area from inside? Dana pulled out her phone. No signal, but she didn't need signal for what she was doing, which was pulling up a file she'd clearly saved locally, a floor plan she'd been using for event logistics. She turned the screen toward him. Service door is there. It connects to the corridor. The staging area is about 60 feet down on the left. Nathan studied the layout for 15 seconds, committing it. Is there a stairwell access from the service corridor? Yes, emergency stairs, goes all the way down. It'll be on a separate system from the elevator locks, Nathan said, mostly to himself. Almost certainly, Olivia said. She'd been quiet while he talked to Dana, which told him she understood when to hold information and when to release it, which was a more valuable quality than most people recognized. Emergency egress can't be electronically sealed. Building code. Nathan looked at her. I need you to stay in this room. Something moved across her face. That's not... The guests need a visible authority figure. If you leave, the room destabilizes. Someone panics and makes a decision that gets someone hurt. He kept his voice level. You're the most recognizable person in this space. Staying here is not the safe option. It's the strategically important one. She held his eyes. He could see her working through it, running the argument against her own instinct, which was clearly to move, to act, to not stand still while something was happening. The man you zip-tied, she said. Rourke. He said the system goes public in 40 minutes whether I provide codes or not. He was buying time, keeping your attention here while the real move happened on 17 and 18. How long have they had? Nathan checked his watch. 26 minutes since the doors sealed. Add however much setup time before that. Olivia's jaw tightened. The Meridian Defense Array files are partitioned. Without my executive override, they can access the hardware, but they can't authenticate the transfer. The partition expires. It resets automatically after 90 minutes of failed authentication attempts. Meaning? Meaning they have a window. After 90 minutes, the partition closes and everything requires a new executive authorization to open. If they can't complete the transfer in time, they leave with nothing. When did the lockdown start? 8:51, Dana said, without being asked, which made Nathan revise his estimate of her upward considerably. He did the math. So they have until 10:21. If my math is right, then we have time. He looked back at Olivia. Stay here. Keep the room calm. The moment that service door opens, you'll know we have egress. She studied him for a moment. He got the impression she was a woman who didn't receive instructions easily, not out of arrogance, but out of the specific kind of independence that comes from spending years being the decision-maker in every room she walked into. Being told to wait while someone else handled things went against something fairly fundamental in her construction. I'll stay, she said. You move fast. I'll do my best, he said, which was the honest answer. The service door was locked. That was the first problem, and it was the kind of problem that had a solution, which was that the catering staff, 3 of them, crouched in the service alcove that ran along the inside of the south wall, had been trying to figure out how to help since the doors sealed and were very willing to assist when Nathan explained what he needed. The third one, a young man named Terrence, who had the wiry build of someone who ran long distances for sport, had his key card on him and used it without hesitation. and Nathan pushed through the service door into a corridor that smelled like industrial cleaning products and was lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed a consistent low note. "Stay in here," he told Terrence. "Don't follow me. When I come back, I'll knock twice. If someone else comes through that door first, it's not me." Terrence nodded with his whole body, the way people nod when they're trying to communicate something that goes beyond the word yes. The staging area was 60 feet down on the left, and Melissa Cho was exactly where Dana had said. A small woman in her 40s with a headset around her neck and a tablet under her arm, and the specific expression of someone who has been managing a logistical crisis alone for the past half hour and is very ready to hand some of that crisis to another person. "You're from the ballroom?" she said before he'd fully come through the door. "Nathan Brooks, contracted security. The main doors are electronically locked and the staff system is unresponsive." "I know. I've been trying to reach facilities for 20 minutes. My radio is dead and I can't get a cell signal." She held up the tablet. "I have the building's event management interface, but I don't have override clearance for security holds. I don't need you to open the ballroom. I need access to the emergency stairwell." She was already moving. "Follow me." The stairwell door was at the end of the corridor, heavy fire door, push bar, exactly where Dana's floor plan had shown it. Melissa put her card against the reader, and the light went green, and Nathan pushed through into concrete and echoing space and the smell of dust and metal. He stood at the top of the stairwell for a moment and listened. Below him, somewhere in the vertical distance, he could hear footsteps. Not one person, multiple, moving upward. He processed that for exactly 2 seconds. Not the team on 17 or 18, because they'd be going down after the servers, not up. And then understood, a third team. Someone had planned for the possibility that the ballroom containment would fail. He started down the stairs, moving quietly, keeping to the inside of the stairwell where his footfall would be absorbed by the wall. He met them on the 38th floor landing, 2 men, moving fast, earpieces in, the kind of physical readiness that said training, not just gym time. They had the momentary advantage of seeing him first around the bend of the stairwell, but he had the advantage of already knowing approximately where they were, which meant he was moving before they finished processing what they were looking at. The first man was halfway through a reach for his sidearm when Nathan closed the distance and made that reach impossible with the efficient finality of someone who had spent a significant portion of his adult life learning how to make specific things impossible in very short time frames. The man went down hard against the concrete wall and stayed there. The second man was better, faster. He got his hands up and got real resistance into the exchange in a way that told Nathan this wasn't just hired muscle. This was someone with specific hand-to-hand training, someone who had probably been through a program not entirely unlike the programs Nathan had been through, which made the whole thing more honest, in a grim way, and more physical. And Nathan's ribs registered their objection loudly. It took longer. Maybe 45 seconds, which in a stairwell felt long. Nathan was breathing harder when it was over than he wanted to be, and he stood for a moment with one hand against the wall taking stock of the damage, which was 2 cracked ribs probably, nothing structural, manageable, and a cut above his left eye from the second man's elbow that was bleeding in the annoying way that cuts above the eye always bleed, which was freely and onto things. He took the second man's earpiece and put it in his own ear. Voices, fragmented, tense, the communication pattern of people managing a timeline under pressure. He caught enough. 17 is clear, transfer initiated, authentication loop running. We need 12 more minutes. 12 minutes? He went down the stairs at a pace that his ribs had opinions about and that he ignored. Mount. The 17th floor was nothing like the ballroom. It was functional, institutional, drop ceilings, gray carpet tiles, the particular fluorescent quiet of a space designed for infrastructure rather than people. The server room was behind a reinforced door at the end of the main corridor, and the corridor was not empty. There were 2 men outside it, and they saw him coming, and the next 40 seconds were not elegant. Nathan had stopped caring about elegant around the 38th floor landing. He cared about outcomes, and the outcome he needed was access to that server room, and he got it, though his left side was communicating increasingly urgent messages that he continued to defer. The server room itself was cold and loud with the white noise of cooling systems, racks of equipment floor to ceiling, and 3 men working at 2 separate terminals with the focused efficiency of people on a clock. Equipment bags open on the floor, external drives connected. 1 man watching the door who turned when Nathan came through it and had the briefest expression of disbelief, "This can't be right," before Nathan closed the distance. 2 of the 3 went down cleanly. The third was physically large and made it complicated, and Nathan's ribs went from manageable to seriously unhappy during the process. But the outcome didn't change, and when it was over, Nathan was standing in a cold server room with his hand pressed against his left side and blood dripping off his chin from the cut above his eye onto the gray floor tile. He looked at the terminals. The transfer was at 63%. He didn't know enough about the specific system to safely interrupt it. Pulling the drives wrong could corrupt the data on either end, which might or might not be the right outcome depending on what Olivia's IT people needed for forensic recovery. He looked for a network isolation option, found what looked like a physical kill switch for external network access on the panel beside the main rack, and flipped it. The transfer progress bar stopped at 63%. He stood there for a moment listening to the cooling systems and his own breathing and the muffled sound of what might have been someone in the corridor and might have been building noise. 63% of nothing usable, he figured, was better than 100% of something. He pulled out the external drives carefully, pocketed them, and leaned against the cold server rack for a moment in a way that wasn't entirely voluntary. His watch buzzed. An alarm he'd set 3 days ago. He looked at it. It wasn't an alarm. It was a voice memo. Emma's voice, because she'd gotten into his watch while he was doing dishes last Tuesday and recorded something which he'd discovered afterward and hadn't deleted because he hadn't. "Daddy, don't forget tomorrow is my performance at school. The 10 o'clock one, not the 2 o'clock one. Miss Patterson says the 2 o'clock is for parents who work, but you said you'd come to the 10 o'clock. Don't forget, okay? Don't forget." And then, after a brief pause in a slightly different tone, "Also, I finished my math homework and it was easy. And you said if it was easy, that means I should do extra pages, but I didn't. Bye." Nathan exhaled slowly. He straightened up from the server rack with the specific, effortful deliberateness of a man who has somewhere to be and intends to get there regardless of what his ribs think about it. He needed to reach the ballroom. He needed to get those doors open, get those people out. And then he needed to get whoever was running this operation from somewhere inside this building. Because whoever it was, they were still in this building, and they still had a communications network running, and they weren't done yet. He just didn't know, not yet, how deep it went, or how high, or how close to the person who had been trusting the wrong man for 6 years without knowing it. He pushed off the server rack and went back out into the corridor, stepping over the large man who was going to have a significant headache in about 20 minutes, and he started back toward the stairwell. The earpiece he'd taken crackled once. Then the channel went completely dead, which meant someone on the other end had realized the silence meant something had gone wrong on the server floor, and they'd cut communications the same way they'd cut the radio channel in the ballroom. Nathan climbed. His ribs climbed with him, arguing the whole way. By the time he reached the 40th floor corridor and went through the staging area and knocked twice on the service door, Terrence opened it before the second knock had fully landed, and pushed back into the ballroom. He was bleeding on his shirt collar and moving with the slightly careful quality of someone managing pain they've decided not to be managed by. The room registered him immediately. Not applause, not relief. Just the collective attention of 400 people who had been waiting and now saw something return that they hadn't been certain would. He found Olivia across the room, near the east wall where she'd apparently been moving between clusters of guests, in the way that people in authority move through crisis situations, not pacing, not performing calm, but actually providing it, which was different and harder. She saw him and crossed toward him with a speed that suggested she'd been watching the service door. "You're bleeding," she said. "Yes." "Did you?" "Server room is neutralized. Transfer stopped at 63%. I have the drives." He touched his jacket pocket. "The main team on 17 is down. There was a secondary team in the stairwell, 38th floor. I don't know if there are more." She looked at the cut above his eye, the way his left arm was positioned slightly away from his body. "You need to—" "The doors," he said. "We need to get these doors open. Your event coordinator, Melissa Cho, she has building access. She can get facilities on the emergency line from the staging area. I'll go to her directly. Olivia was already turning. Not alone. She turned back, gave him a look that was complicated, somewhere between irritated and something more honest than irritated. You can barely stand up straight, she said. I'm standing fine. You have blood on your collar and you're favoring your left side. I'm favoring it slightly. Nathan. It was the first time she'd used his name. The way she said it didn't sound like she was talking to a contractor. It sounded like someone talking to a person. Tell me what I need to do. I'll do it. You sit down. He looked at her for a moment. In all the years he'd spent doing what he did, the years he didn't talk about, the years he'd packed away when Emma was 2 and the world had turned into a version of itself he couldn't keep living inside. He'd worked with a lot of people who considered themselves capable of handling pressure. Most of them were right, but capability under pressure looked different on different people. And what it looked like on Olivia Hayes was a specific, undecorated steadiness that he hadn't entirely expected from a 30-year-old CEO at a charity gala, and that he found himself, against his own inclinations, relying on. Go to the staging area, he said. Find Melissa Cho. Tell her to contact facilities through the emergency building line. Not the event management system, the physical emergency line. Have them release the security hold on the main doors from the master panel in the basement. That's separate from whatever system was used to seal them. And I'll keep the room stable. She held his eyes for a moment. Can I trust you? She asked, and it came out plainly, without performance, the way people ask questions they actually need answered. He thought about that for half a second, not because he was uncertain of the answer, but because the question deserved the weight of a real answer rather than an automatic one. I got $300 for tonight, he said, and I'm going to be at my daughter's school performance at 10 tomorrow morning. Between now and then, yes. You can trust me. Something shifted in her expression. She almost smiled, but the situation was too wrong for it to land fully, so it stayed at the edges of her face and was, Nathan thought, more honest for it. Okay, she said, and went. He stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by 400 people who were watching him with the particular attention of people who have recently been very afraid and are now calibrating how afraid to still be. And he pressed his left hand lightly against his side, and breathed carefully, and waited. On the floor, Rourke was watching him too. Nathan met his eyes once. Rourke looked away first. 11 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. What had started as the most important night of Sterling Dynamics' fiscal year had become something else entirely. Something Nathan didn't have language for yet. Something that wasn't finished, because the man whose voice he'd heard in pieces on that stolen earpiece, the man who'd been asking Team 1 to report from somewhere else in this building, the man who'd known exactly when Olivia was going to reach the podium and had asked her himself an hour before it happened. That man wasn't in the stairwell, wasn't in the server room, wasn't zip-tied on the ballroom floor. He was still out there. And he knew the building the way only someone who worked in it every day would know it. And he had not, Nathan was certain, run. The police arrived at 9:47 p.m. 3 patrol units first, then 2 detectives, then, because the words Sterling Dynamics and armed takeover had apparently traveled fast through dispatch, a lieutenant named Vasquez, who moved through the ballroom with the brisk, absorptive attention of someone mentally writing a report while simultaneously conducting the situation that would become that report. He was maybe 50, with the build of a man who'd been athletic 20 years ago and hadn't entirely stopped, and he looked at Nathan the way cops look at people who've left 6 men zip-tied on a ballroom floor, with a mixture of professional respect and the specific wariness you'd apply to any variable you couldn't fully account for. You're the contractor, Vasquez said. It wasn't really a question. Nathan Brooks, temp hire through Barrington Security Services. Nathan handed over his ID with the particular cooperative promptness of someone who has learned that the fastest way through police questioning is to make yourself easy to process. The 6 on the floor came in through the same agency. I have reason to believe their credentials were forged. We'll verify. Vasquez looked at the cut above Nathan's eye, still sluggishly bleeding because Nathan had done nothing about it. You get that in the ballroom? Stairwell. Vasquez's eyebrow moved slightly. What were you doing in the stairwell? Stopping the secondary team from completing a server breach on the 17th floor. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and produced the external drives he'd pulled from the terminals. Transfer was running when I got there. I isolated the network and pulled these. 63% complete. I don't know if that's recoverable data or not. Your forensics people will need to look at it. Vasquez took the drives and stared at them for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating the scale of what he'd walked into. How many on the secondary team? 3 on 17, 2 in the stairwell. There may be others I'm not aware of. And the primary target? He glanced toward Olivia, who was 20 feet away talking to 2 other officers with the focused intensity of someone providing a detailed statement rather than a traumatized account. The CEO is unharmed. Vasquez nodded slowly. He looked at Nathan for another few seconds in that measuring way. You're going to need to come in and give a full statement. I know. I'll come in tonight if you need it. I need to be at my daughter's school by 10 tomorrow morning. Vasquez looked at him. Your daughter's school. She has a performance. Another pause. Mr. Brooks, Vasquez said, with the tone of a man choosing his words carefully, you just neutralized 9 armed individuals and stopped what appears to be a multi-million-dollar corporate espionage operation. And your primary concern right now is the 10 o'clock performance? Yes. Nathan kept his face neutral. She's been practicing for 3 weeks. I told her I'd be there. Vasquez looked at him for one more second. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Statement can wait until morning. Be at the precinct by 8. I'll be there at 7:30, Nathan said. Olivia found him 15 minutes later, sitting on the edge of the demonstration table, which was still set up exactly as it had been for a presentation that had never happened, with a first aid kit that Dana had located somewhere and pressed into his hands with the specific insistence of someone who had decided that taking care of logistics was the most useful thing she could do with the adrenaline still running through her system. You should let someone look at that, Olivia said, nodding at the cut. I'm looking at it. You're holding a gauze pad against it and hoping for the best. That's a form of looking at it. She sat down on the edge of the table, not across from him but beside him, which surprised him slightly. She had the kind of posture that suggested she'd been told to sit up straight her whole childhood and had internalized it to the point where it was just how she was built, but she looked tired in a way that good posture couldn't fully conceal. There were thin lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there 2 hours ago. Vasquez says you gave him the drives, she said. Kept copies of the serial numbers. Your IT forensics team will want chain of custody documentation. Already called our CTO. He's on his way in. She paused. You think about chain of custody documentation after doing all that. It's just habit. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the ballroom was slowly emptying. Guests being interviewed in small groups, some already leaving, the particular dispersal of a crowd after something that no one had planned for, and everyone would be processing for weeks. The orchestra was gone. The chandeliers were still on, but someone had turned the dimmer up, so the room was bright and functional rather than atmospheric, which made it feel like a different place entirely. Marcus wasn't in the building, Olivia said. Nathan looked at her. Vasquez ran the security footage from the lobby. Marcus left at 8:15, 45 minutes before the lockdown. She said it flat, without inflection, which was a way of carrying something heavy by not letting it move. He signed out, said goodnight to the front desk. He had his coat on. He knew the exact timeline, Nathan said. He built the timeline. She turned the statement over like something she was testing the weight of. 6 years. He managed our security protocols, our contractor relationships, our building access credentials. He designed the system that Team 1 used to seal the ballroom. He had working copies of every access card in this building. Nathan pressed the gauze against his eyebrow and said nothing. The thing is, she continued, he was good at his job. Genuinely good. I never had a reason to... She stopped. Tried again. He flagged 3 legitimate security breaches in the past 2 years. Both times he handled it before it became a public problem. I trusted him because he'd earned it. Which is why he was valuable, Nathan said. You don't build an inside operation with someone you don't trust. You build it with someone everyone trusts. She looked at him sideways. That's not comforting. No, it's not supposed to be. He shifted the gauze. Someone funded this. Marcus is capable, but the equipment those teams had, the coordination, the forged credentials, that's organization money. There's a buyer somewhere. Someone who wanted the Meridian Defense Array badly enough to plan this for how long? The building access logs will tell us when the surveillance equipment was installed, she said. If there is any. There is, Nathan said. 2 cameras in the main corridor on floor 17. They weren't part of the original building system. Wrong housing, wrong mounting angle. They were watching the server room from inside. She turned to look at him fully. You noticed that while you were... I notice things. It's a problem sometimes. When did you... When I came through the corridor on the way to the server room. I filed it. He saw her expression. Not a problem right now. It'll be relevant when your IT team starts the internal audit. She stared at him for a moment with an expression he was starting to recognize. The look of someone who keeps recalibrating, keeps adjusting their understanding of a person based on new data, and is running into the experience of the data continuing to not run out. Who are you? She said. Not rudely. The way someone asks a question they genuinely don't have the answer to. Nathan considered how to respond to that, which was its own kind of answer, because there wasn't a short version that was also an accurate version. Tonight I was a temp, he said. Before tonight. Before tonight is a longer conversation. He stood up from the table, which cost him something in the left side, and he kept his face even about it. Right now I need to talk to Vasquez about Marcus Grant's known associates and the question of where he went after he left this building. That can wait 15 minutes, Olivia said. He looked at her. Sit down, she said. Let me actually look at that cut. I did 2 years of pre-med before I switched to business. I'm not useless. Pre-med 20 years ago doesn't 8 years ago. I'm 30. A slight edge in it. Sit down, Nathan. He sat down. Partly because she was right, partly because his ribs had been lobbying for a sitting decision for the past 20 minutes and had finally accumulated enough votes. She took the gauze from him without asking and looked at the cut with the focused, unsentimental attention of someone assessing a practical problem. She found a bottle of antiseptic in the kit, and when she applied it, she didn't warn him first, which he found he respected. Deep enough to scar, she said. Not deep enough for stitches if you keep pressure on it. It's not the first. I can tell. She kept her eyes on what she was doing. The ribs? Bruised, maybe cracked. Nothing structural. You can't know that without imaging. I've had cracked ribs before. I know what they feel like. That's not actually how medicine works. I'll get them checked in the morning, after the precinct and before the performance. She was quiet for a moment, applying a butterfly closure to the cut with more precision than he'd expected. Her hands were steady. Not the careful steady of someone afraid to make a mistake, the natural steady of someone whose baseline state included a working relationship with their own nerves. The performance, she said. Your daughter. Emma. She's 8. What's the performance? End of term thing, songs, some kind of choreography. She described it as, quote, mostly just standing in a line and hoping nobody forgets the words. Olivia's mouth curved. It was the first real version of it he'd seen all night. She sounds pragmatic. She really is. How long has it been just the two of you? The question landed in a way he hadn't expected, partly because it was personal, and partly because she asked it simply, without the careful hedging that people usually apply to the question, the way people soften questions about difficult things to protect themselves as much as the person they're asking. He looked at the far wall for a second. 6 years. Emma was 2. She didn't say I'm sorry, which he was grateful for, because I'm sorry was the response that closed the conversation rather than holding it open, and he wasn't sure why, but he didn't want this particular conversation to close yet. Her mother? Olivia asked. Her name was Rachel. He kept his voice level, the way you keep your voice level when you've said something enough times that the pain of it has changed character, hasn't disappeared, just transformed into something more like a weight you carry instead of a wound that bleeds. She was part of a joint operation I was commanding. Navy SEAL unit, protection detail for a diplomatic transport in a situation I can't fully detail. The intelligence we'd been given was wrong about the threat profile. Significantly wrong. He paused. She was hit during the extraction. I carried her out. She didn't make it to the medevac. The ballroom was noisy with distant voices and movement, with the procedural sounds of a situation being officially processed. But the small space around the two of them on the edge of the demonstration table felt quiet in a different way. "I'm sorry," Olivia said. Not the reflexive version, the one that meant something. "It was 6 years ago." "That doesn't make it not true now." He looked at her. She was watching him with an expression that wasn't pity, which would have been wrong, and wasn't discomfort, which would have been dishonest, but something more genuine than either. The expression of a person sitting with someone else's difficult thing without trying to resolve it or move past it. "You left after," she said. Not a question. "I stayed for another 8 months, then I got out." He shifted on the table. Emma needed a parent who was present, not deployed, not reading threat assessments at 2 in the morning. "I bought a house in a neighborhood where nothing happens, and I took work I could schedule around school pickups and parent-teacher conferences." He gestured vaguely at the room. "Temp security contracts." "Is that enough for you?" He thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved. "Most days," he said. "Some days I notice things I'm not supposed to notice, and I have to decide what to do with that. Tonight was one of those nights." Olivia looked down at her hands, which were still holding the remaining bandage supplies from the kit. She set them down carefully. "The man who gave the wrong intelligence," she said, "for your wife's operation. Do you know who it was?" "I know who signed off on it. I know the chain above that name." He kept his voice even. "I spent 2 years trying to go through official channels after I got out. The report was classified in a way that made it unreachable, and everyone I talked to had suddenly developed memory problems." He paused. "I stopped. Not because I stopped caring, because Emma needed a father who was here, and going after that, it would have taken me somewhere I couldn't come back from." Olivia was quiet. He could see her processing this, fitting it alongside everything she'd already learned about him tonight, the way you fit new pieces into a picture that keeps turning out to be larger than you thought. "Marcus would know," she said, slowly. He looked at her. "He spent 8 years building intelligence networks before Sterling Dynamics. Freelance security consulting. That's how I found him, through a government contractor referral. If he's been running a parallel operation inside this company for years, he has contacts in classified spaces." She met his eyes. "He would know things like that. Things that are buried." Nathan held her gaze and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that was also safe to say in that moment, and some silences were more honest than words. The maintenance corridor on the south side of floor 40 was not a place many people in Sterling Dynamics had ever been. It existed in the architectural gap between the ballroom level and the utility infrastructure above it. Access panels, HVAC routing, data conduit bundles running through the wall cavities like the building's circulatory system made visible. The lights were motion sensor fluorescents that flickered on 30 seconds after you entered and turned off again if you stayed still too long. Nathan found the first piece of it by accident, which was the only honest way to describe it. He'd gone back into the service corridor to retrieve something he'd left with Terrence, the radio he'd taken from the stairwell team, which he wanted to hand to Vasquez. And the corridor light had triggered early, before he'd reached the motion sensor's range, which meant something else had activated it. He stopped. The corridor branched left into the maintenance space. Nathan went left. The camera was mounted behind a junction box, angled to cover the intersection of the main corridor and the ballroom service entrance. It was the same housing, the same wrong-angle mounting he'd seen on 17. Whoever had installed these had a system. Same components, same installation approach, which meant a single team with a consistent method, which meant planning that went back further than tonight. He followed the data cable. It ran through the wall cavity along a conduit that didn't appear on the standard building schematic. He could tell because the conduit color was wrong, a gray-green that didn't match the orange-coded data lines in the Meridian Tower's infrastructure. Someone had run a parallel system inside the walls, a shadow network. He followed it for 40 feet until it terminated at a junction panel that had been installed behind a false maintenance cover. The cover looked original, the same institutional gray as everything else, but the hinges were newer, the screws not yet worn. Behind the cover was a compact network hub connected to 6 cables. 6. The same number as the cameras he'd found on 17 and here in the corridor. 6 installations, all routing through this single junction point. Nathan took photographs with his phone, which he would give to Vasquez. But what he was really looking at wasn't the hardware. Beside the hub, zip-tied to the conduit bracket, was a laminated card. It had a building diagram on it, floor 17, specifically the server room approach corridor, with handwritten notations in a small, precise script. The notations included timing, access windows, a sequence that matched exactly the sequence the teams tonight had followed, and at the bottom of the card, in the same small script, a 4-digit code followed by a set of initials. MG. Not because Marcus Grant was sloppy. Nathan didn't think he was sloppy. He thought Marcus Grant was so certain this space would never be found by anyone who wasn't already part of his operation that it had never occurred to him to remove the reference card. It was a working document. It was supposed to stay here until after everything was finished and the whole apparatus was dismantled cleanly. Instead, it was evidence. Nathan carefully unzipped the cable tie, took the card, and put it in his jacket pocket alongside the external drives. He stood in the maintenance corridor for a moment, in the flickering fluorescent light, with the sound of the HVAC system running its constant background tone, and he thought about a man who had shaken his hand that afternoon during the contractor briefing, made eye contact, asked if everyone had their assignments clear. A man named Marcus Grant, who had been running this building's shadow infrastructure for years, who had sat across from Olivia Hayes in meetings and told her security was under control, who had asked her what time she was going to the podium. He thought about the kind of patience that required, the kind of compartmentalization, the ability to occupy 2 identities simultaneously, to be competent and trusted in one life while building something corrosive in the other. He'd known people like that. Not many, but enough to understand that the thing that made it possible wasn't the absence of conscience. It was the presence of a rationalization so complete that the conscience never got the full picture. Marcus Grant had believed at some level that this was justifiable, that Olivia Hayes and Sterling Dynamics and the Meridian Defense Array were pieces on a board rather than people, and that what he was doing was a transaction, not a betrayal. Nathan took the maintenance corridor back toward the main ballroom, walking carefully so his ribs didn't decide to become the primary subject of his attention. He found Olivia in the lobby of the 42nd floor, outside the ballroom proper, in conversation with a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Alan Fitch, Sterling Dynamics General Counsel, and who had arrived from somewhere in the building with the particular speed of a lawyer who has learned that the faster you reach a situation, the more you can shape how it gets documented. Fitch was in the middle of saying something about media containment when Nathan approached, and he paused in the way people pause when they want you to know they were in the middle of something important. Nathan handed Olivia the laminated card. She looked at it. Her jaw tightened slightly. Floor 40 maintenance corridor, Nathan said, behind a false panel. There's a network hub running 6 surveillance cameras, 2 on 17, and at least 1 in the service corridor on this floor. The cable routing doesn't appear on standard building schematics. Someone ran it in parallel, probably during a period when Marcus Grant would have authorized building maintenance access. Fitch took the card and looked at it. His expression went through several revisions in quick succession. We need to get our forensic team. Tell Vasquez, Nathan said. He needs to know before anyone moves anything. Chain of custody. Fitch blinked. Yes, of course. He looked at Olivia in the way lawyers look at clients when they want to signal that the situation has become significantly more complicated. Olivia, we need to discuss how we handle disclosure. I'm not handling disclosure tonight, Alan. The board will want a lot of things. Tonight I want the police to do their job, and I want to understand the full scope of what just happened inside this building. She looked at Nathan. How long has this been running? I don't know. The hardware in the maintenance corridor looked like it had been there for a while. The dust patterns around the junction panel. He paused. Your internal auditors will need to trace the network installation back through work orders and building access logs. But if I had to estimate, more than a year, possibly 2. Olivia absorbed that with the particular stillness of someone for whom the information is confirming a fear rather than introducing one. He had access to our development schedules, she said quietly. He sat in on security briefings for the Meridian Array project. He knew the testing timeline, the authentication architecture. He knew everything. She stopped. He would have known who to sell it to. That's what Vasquez needs to establish, Nathan said. The buyer is the top of this. Marcus is the mechanism. Someone commissioned it. Fitch had his phone out and was typing with focused urgency, the way lawyers type when they're simultaneously communicating with 12 people. Olivia looked at Nathan. In the lobby light, she looked different from the way she'd looked in the ballroom. More real, somehow, the event-ready polish of the earlier evening worn down into something that had more texture. The tiredness was visible now. She wasn't hiding it, which told him she'd made a decision at some point in the last hour to stop managing how she appeared and just be where she was. You said Marcus would know things, Nathan said. Things that are buried. She met his eyes. I need you to not tell me that, he said. What you said before, about his contacts, his intelligence networks. I need you to not put that in front of me as a thing that's available. She held his gaze steadily. Why? Because I'm aware of what I would be willing to do to get that information, and I don't trust myself to make a good decision about it in a room where I've got cracked ribs and my wife's name just came up in the same conversation as his name. The lobby was quiet between them for a moment. Fitch was on his phone, not listening. Olivia nodded once, slowly. Okay, she said. I won't. Thank you. For what it's worth, she said carefully, I think it says something about you that you know that about yourself. Or it says I've made that mistake before. That too, she agreed. Both can be true. He looked at the floor for a moment. Through the closed ballroom doors behind them, he could hear the ongoing procedural sounds of the police working the scene, voices, movement, the occasional radio burst. There's something else, he said. She waited. Marcus left this building at 8:15, 45 minutes before the lockdown. That's not the behavior of a man who expected failure. He left because he thought the operation was going to run clean, and he wanted distance. Nathan looked at her. But the operation didn't run clean. And now he knows it didn't, because the fallback communications he had with the teams are silent. And silent in this situation means one thing. He'll run, she said. He might already be running, or, and this is what I want Vasquez to think about tonight, he might not run because he has something more valuable than whatever was on those drives, and he's calculating whether it's worth using. Olivia's expression shifted. What does he have that's more valuable? He has what he knows, Nathan said. 6 years inside this company. Personnel files, security architecture, board communications, strategic plans. Information doesn't need a hard drive. He carries it. She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, Nathan could see something solidifying in her. Not resolve exactly, more like the specific clarity that arrives when a person fully understands the problem they're dealing with for the first time, without any remaining softening from surprise or disbelief. He's going to try to leverage it, she said. It's what I would do. If I were him, and I just watched the operation fail, and I had what he has in his head, I'd make contact, not with the police, with whoever commissioned this, and I'd tell them I'm still valuable. And if they agree, she said, they extract him. And if they don't, Nathan said, he has a problem. Neither of them said what the problem would look like. Some things didn't need to be said out loud to be understood. Fitch lowered his phone. Vasquez is outside. He wants both of you. Nathan straightened up carefully, and his ribs filed another complaint that he logged and deferred, and he followed Olivia Hayes toward the elevator. And somewhere below them in the 42 floors of the Meridian Tower, the police were moving through corridors and server rooms and maintenance spaces, assembling the pieces of something that had been built inside these walls while everyone was looking in other directions. And somewhere outside the building, in the city that was continuing its night without any awareness of what had happened in a ballroom on the 42nd floor, Marcus Grant was making a decision. Nathan didn't know yet what the decision would be, but he knew Marcus Grant was smart and patient, and that smart, patient men who have just watched years of careful work fall apart in a single evening didn't make small decisions. They made the only decision they had left. Vasquez had set up a temporary command post in the Meridian Tower's 41st floor conference room, one level below the ballroom, close enough to the active scene, but removed enough to think. A folding table had materialized from somewhere, covered in tablets and printed floor plans, and the particular organized chaos of a major incident investigation in its first 2 hours. Two detectives Nathan hadn't met yet were working phones in the corner. A crime scene technician was photographing the laminated card Nathan had retrieved from the maintenance corridor, handling it with the careful attention it deserved. Vasquez stood at the head of the table with a coffee he hadn't touched, and a look on his face that suggested the full picture had been coming in pieces for the past hour, and each piece was larger than the last. "Grant's vehicle is still in the parking structure," he said, when Nathan and Olivia came through the door. "Level B2. Hasn't moved." "He didn't drive," Nathan said. "No. Building cameras show him walking out the main entrance at 8:14. No luggage, no bag beyond his regular briefcase. He turned left on Meridian Avenue and walked out of frame." Vasquez set down the coffee. "We have units canvassing, but it's been nearly 2 hours. A man with 6 years of security expertise in this building who had 45 minutes of lead time and knew exactly what he was doing. He's not running blind," Nathan said. "He had an exit plan, someone waiting, or a route to a location he'd prepared in advance. He would have had multiple options staged." "That's what I'm thinking too." Vasquez looked at Olivia. "Ms. Hayes, we need a complete access audit of Grant's credentials going back 3 years minimum. Everything he could have reached. Personnel files, financial systems, classified project documentation." "Our CTO is already pulling it," she said. "He'll have a preliminary scope report in the morning. I need it by 6 a.m. "You'll have it." No hesitation. Nathan noted that. Some executives in a crisis talked about what their teams could do as approximations, as best guesses cushioned with qualifiers. Olivia stated it like a fact she was personally responsible for making true. Vasquez nodded and looked back at Nathan. "The two men in the stairwell. You said one of them had specific hand-to-hand training. Advanced, not standard contract security. Someone had put time into him. Because we're running their prints now, and one of them, the larger of the two, has a file that connects to a private military contractor that was flagged by federal agencies 18 months ago. Connections to 3 different corporate espionage cases in the past 4 years. Vasquez let that land. This wasn't improvised. This was a professional operation that cost real money and took real time to put together. "Which brings us back to the buyer," Nathan said. "Which brings us back to the buyer," Vasquez agreed. "And the question of whether Marcus Grant, wherever he is right now, is the only person in this building tonight who knew who that buyer was." The room was quiet for a moment, except for the 2 detectives on their phones. Nathan was looking at the floor plan on the table. Floor 17, the server room, the corridor approach. Looking at it from the outside, with the distance of a diagram rather than the close quarters of the actual space, he could see the operation's logic clearly. The ballroom containment was designed to hold long enough for the server breach to complete. 45 minutes minimum, which was the window Marcus had calculated for a full authenticated transfer. The 6 men in the ballroom weren't supposed to fight anyone. They were supposed to present a situation so controlled, so overwhelming in its apparent finality, that nobody would make a move that complicated the timeline. What they hadn't planned for was Nathan Brooks standing near the east corridor with a plastic cup of water he hadn't touched, noticing the way 6 men faced the wrong direction. "There's something else," Vasquez said, and his voice shifted register in a way that made both Nathan and Olivia focus. He picked up a tablet and turned it toward them. On the screen was a surveillance still. Exterior building camera, time-stamped 43 minutes ago. A man in a dark coat on the sidewalk across from the Meridian Tower's east face, looking up. "This was captured by a traffic camera half a block away," Vasquez said. "One of my detectives flagged it 10 minutes ago." The image was grainy in the way nighttime traffic cameras were always grainy, but the face was recognizable. Nathan had seen it in a photograph in Olivia's personnel file on the tablet Vasquez had shown him an hour earlier. Square jaw, close-cropped gray at the temples, the composed posture of a man who was not particularly concerned about being seen. Marcus Grant had stood across the street from his own operation and watched the police arrive. "He's still in the area," Nathan said. "Was, 43 minutes ago." Vasquez set the tablet down. which tells me one of two things. Either he's waiting for something, a signal, a contact, or he came back to assess the damage and decide his next move based on what he saw. He's not waiting for a contact, Nathan said. If his exit plan had run clean, the contact would already have collected him. The fact that he's standing on a sidewalk looking at the building means the plan broke down and he's improvising. Improvising how? Nathan looked at Olivia. She met his eyes, and he could see that she'd arrived at the same place he had, because she was smart and she'd had time to think, and the logic only went one direction. He needs leverage, she said. He can't run without resources, and whatever resources he had staged were contingent on the operation succeeding. Now, they're not available. She paused. He has what he knows, and he knows this building, and he knows this company, and he knows... She stopped. What? Vasquez said. She looked at Nathan for one moment, something passing between them that wasn't a conversation but was a communication, and then she looked at Vasquez. The Meridian Defense Array Authentication, my executive override codes. The transfer on the server floor was stopped at 63%. The partition is still open for... She checked her watch. 41 more minutes. After that, it closes automatically and requires a complete new authorization sequence. Vasquez understood immediately. If Grant can get those codes from you in the next 41 minutes, he can initiate a new transfer from any external access point that has the right credentials. He doesn't need the server room. He just needs the codes and a clean connection. He'd need your biometric confirmation too, Vasquez said. Yes, she said. He'd need me. The words sat in the room. Nathan looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked at Nathan. The detectives in the corner had gone quiet. We need to move her, Nathan said. Agreed. Ms. Hayes. No, Olivia said. Both men looked at her. She had a particular expression that Nathan was beginning to understand was her thinking face. Not the public-facing composure she'd had at the beginning of the evening, but the real version, the one where she was working through something at speed and the working was visible. If we move me, and Marcus is watching, he knows we've identified the leverage, she said. He goes to ground and we lose him. The buyers lose a direct line to the technology, but they still have Marcus, and Marcus has 6 years of Sterling Dynamics intelligence in his head. That doesn't go away. She looked at Nathan specifically. But if I stay, if he thinks he still has a viable option, he'll make contact. You're not bait, Vasquez said flatly. I'm not suggesting I walk outside and stand on the sidewalk. I'm suggesting that we use the 41 minutes we have instead of running from them. She turned to Nathan. You know how operations like this work. Tell me I'm wrong. Nathan didn't tell her she was wrong, because she wasn't. He also didn't immediately tell her she was right, because the variables were wrong in ways that mattered. If he makes contact, Nathan said, he does it on his terms and his timeline. He controls the approach. We're reactive. Then we change that, she said. We make him think he can control it, and we control it instead. That requires an active deception with multiple moving pieces, limited time, and a man who has spent 6 years building intelligence networks and will immediately detect anything that reads as staged. I know. Olivia, he asked me what time I was going to the podium, she said. Tonight, an hour before the lockdown. He stood in front of me and asked me that question, and I told him 9 o'clock, and I thanked him for checking in. The words were steady, but the thing underneath them wasn't. The thing underneath them being 6 years of professional trust administered by someone who had been calculating his exit from the beginning. I want him in a room. I want him sitting across from something that's real and not staged, and I want him to have to look at what he did. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. The professional part of him was running risk assessments. Nathan could see it. It has to be her decision, Nathan said to Vasquez. It's her company and her codes and her exposure. Vasquez looked at him. And if it goes wrong? Then I'll handle it, Nathan said. It came out simply, without drama, the way you say a true thing. Well, the plan, such as it was, took 11 minutes to set up and required Vasquez to make 2 phone calls he clearly wasn't entirely comfortable with, and Olivia to return to the ballroom, now officially a crime scene, but still her building, still her floor, and sit at the demonstration table with her phone visible, in line of sight of the remaining building cameras that Marcus would know were there, appearing to be exactly what she was, a woman staying in her own building because she wasn't going to let what happened tonight drive her out of it. Nathan was in the service corridor. Vasquez had two plainclothes officers on the floor below via the stairwell, ready to move on his signal. The building's external camera feeds were being monitored in real time by the detective team upstairs. The first 20 minutes were quiet. Nathan stood in the corridor and breathed carefully and thought about Emma, because thinking about Emma was something he did when he was in a waiting situation and needed to keep his nervous system from going somewhere unproductive. He thought about the flashlight she thought he didn't know about. He thought about the look she'd given him over dinner when he'd signed the note on the whiteboard with Dad. He thought about an 8-year-old in a line of other 8-year-olds, probably in the second row because she was neither the tallest nor the shortest, doing choreography that she'd described with precise and affectionate skepticism. He was going to be there at 10 o'clock. That was not negotiable. Everything else tonight had variables. That one didn't. His earpiece crackled. Vasquez's voice, low. Movement on camera 3. East stairwell entrance, floor 40. Someone just badged in. Nathan straightened. Building badge, Vasquez continued. Registered to a maintenance contractor. The same access credential pattern we're seeing on the forged cards from the ballroom team. He's inside. Nathan moved. He went through the maintenance corridor rather than the main hallway because the maintenance corridor ran parallel to the east stairwell access and came out 12 feet closer to the ballroom entrance. And because 12 feet mattered when the person you were moving toward had spent 6 years learning this building's architecture better than most people who'd built it. He reached the junction point and stopped. Listened. Footsteps. Measured, not rushing. Someone who knew where they were going and wasn't afraid of the building they were moving through. Then a voice. Through the wall, thin partition between the corridor and the main hallway, clear enough to catch the shape of it. Olivia. And then after a pause, don't reach for anything. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need 10 minutes. Nathan held his position. He pressed the transmit button on his earpiece twice. The signal he and Vasquez had agreed on for contact made, hold position, and listened. Olivia's voice came through, steady. You have a lot of nerve walking back in here, Marcus. I know. A pause. That's not a denial. You stood in front of me an hour ago and asked when I was going to the podium. You were timing it. Yes. That's all you have? Yes? What do you want me to say? Marcus's voice was tired in a way that sounded genuine, which Nathan noted and filed. Genuine tiredness in a person in his situation meant he'd been running on operational focus for hours and was now in the phase where that focus had burned down to something more exposed. I'm not going to stand here and give you a speech about my reasons. You wouldn't believe it, and I don't think I'd mean it. Try me. A longer pause. Nathan could hear movement, Marcus shifting position probably, the sound of someone who wasn't comfortable standing still. The company was going to sell the array to the wrong people, Marcus said. The board had 3 private meetings in the past 18 months that you don't know about, Jeffrey Marsh and 2 others. They've been in quiet negotiations with a buyer whose end-use intentions for that technology should alarm you. I put together a full intelligence picture on them 14 months ago and brought it to Marsh, and he buried it. 3 weeks later, I was told my security clearance within the project was being restricted. Silence. Nathan could imagine Olivia's face, the effort of processing information that might be true alongside the knowledge that the person delivering it had spent the evening trying to steal the thing he was now claiming to be protecting. So you decided to steal it yourself, she said. I decided to make sure it didn't end up in their hands. By putting it in someone else's hands. By removing it from an infrastructure that was already compromised by people you trust more than you trusted me. His voice had an edge now. Not anger, something more like the specific frustration of a person who believes their reasoning is correct and is finding it impossible to make that case. I was trying to... Stop, she said, quiet and absolute. Don't tell me what you were trying to do. Tell me where the buyer is. A pause. I'll tell you everything, Marcus said. Every meeting, every contact, every communication. The full picture of what Marsh was doing with those board members. But I need something in exchange. You're not in a position to negotiate, Marcus. I have 6 years of information in my head that your lawyers and your board and the federal investigators who are going to be here by tomorrow morning would very much like access to. I am exactly in a position to negotiate. Nathan pressed transmit twice again, then once. Vasquez's return signal came back, holding, ready. "What do you want?" Olivia said. "Passage. Tonight. Whatever deal your lawyers can put together with the federal prosecutor, I'll cooperate fully, complete disclosure, everything I have, in exchange for a negotiated arrangement that keeps me out of a general population federal facility. That's not mine to give. Then get Vasquez on the phone." "Nathan," she said, and her voice changed register, became something more direct. "I think it's time." Nathan was already moving through the door. He came through the ballroom service entrance into the main space, and Marcus Grant was standing 8 feet from the demonstration table, a man of 52 who looked younger than that in the way of people who maintain themselves by habit, still in the dark coat from the traffic camera image. No visible weapon, his hands slightly away from his body, in the posture of someone who understood what open hands communicated in a room where they'd already lost the element of surprise. He looked at Nathan. His expression went through a revision. "You're the temp," he said. "I was," Nathan said. Marcus held his eyes and Nathan watched him process. The ballroom, the stairwell teams, the server room, mapping backward to a single person. "You stopped all of it." "Most of it." Something moved across Marcus's face. Not quite respect, not quite frustration. The expression of a chess player who has just identified the piece that cost him the game and is deciding how he feels about the quality of the move. "You were a contractor," Marcus said. "One night, $300. Why didn't you just stay out of it?" Nathan said. "Most people would have." "I noticed something I wasn't supposed to ignore. That's all." Marcus looked at him for another moment, then looked at Olivia. Then at the space between them where nothing physical stood but something else did, something Marcus was visibly assessing. "The police are in this building," Marcus said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Then this is already over." "Yes," Nathan said again. "It is." Marcus exhaled. One slow breath, the kind that means a person is arriving somewhere they'd been trying to avoid and have finally run out of road before it. But he wasn't done. Nathan saw it before Marcus moved. A shift in weight, a quality of decision in the eyes that preceded action, and then Marcus reached into his coat, not for a weapon, for a tablet. He brought it out and held it so Nathan could see the screen, which was displaying a transfer interface, an external connection, running on a mobile hotspot, already authenticated to the Sterling Dynamics executive partition. "I still have the window," Marcus said. His voice was different now, not tired anymore. The operational focus had come back. 14 minutes, and I have a secondary authentication key I built into the system 2 years ago. A backdoor that doesn't require your biometrics. He looked at Olivia. "I'm the one who designed your security architecture, Olivia. Did you think I didn't build myself an exit?" The room changed temperature. Nathan was 8 feet away. The tablet was in Marcus's left hand, right hand resting on the edge of it. If Nathan moved, Marcus could initiate the transfer in the time it took to cover 8 feet, and Nathan didn't know enough about the interface to know if a partial initiation was recoverable. "Then why are you showing it to me?" Olivia said. Her voice was exact. "If you have what you're saying you have, you walk out of here and use it. You don't stand in the middle of a crime scene and show me." Marcus looked at her. "You came back," she said. "You stood across the street and you watched the police arrive and you came back inside. That's not what someone does when they have a clean exit." She took a step toward him. "What do you actually want, Marcus?" His jaw moved. Something in his face that was trying to be hard about it and wasn't entirely succeeding. "I want you to understand that I wasn't wrong about Marsh," he said. "Everything I told you. It's true. The board meetings, the buyer, the buried report, that happened." "Maybe it did," she said. "And maybe if you'd come to me directly instead of building a shadow network inside my walls for 2 years, we could have done something about it together. You would have gone to Marsh. I would have investigated. He controls 3 board seats, Olivia. He would have killed it. You don't know that. I know how boards work. And I know how trust works," she said. "What you did tonight, the 6 men in the ballroom, the guests who were terrified, the people Nathan put himself between, you could have hurt someone. You nearly did. Whatever your reasons were, that's what actually happened. The tablet was still in his hand. Nathan was watching Marcus's fingers. They hadn't moved toward the screen. Put it down, Nathan said. Quietly. Not an order, more like an offer. The kind of quiet you use when you want to give someone a way to arrive at the right place without it feeling like defeat. Marcus looked at him again. Whatever's on that device, Nathan said, isn't worth what comes after. You know that. You've known it since you watched the police arrive and you still came back inside. He paused. You came back because part of you wanted it to be over. So let it be over. Something in Marcus's posture changed. A tension that had been structural rather than visible, the kind you carry for a long time, released itself in the span of a few seconds and left him looking his age for the first time. He set the tablet on the demonstration table. Nathan crossed the 8 feet and put his hand on it, and the moment he had it in his hands, he felt Marcus's full exhale behind him. The sound of someone who has been holding something unsustainable for a very long time and has finally set it down. He handed the tablet to Olivia without looking at the screen. She took it and immediately pressed the interface's kill switch, a physical button on the side she'd apparently identified the moment she'd seen it, and the screen went dark. Nathan pressed his earpiece. Vasquez, we have him. The next 4 minutes had the quality of organized inevitability. Vasquez through the main doors with his plainclothes officers, Marcus Grant cooperative in the specific way of a man who has made a decision and intends to see it through, Fitch appearing somewhere in the background already on his phone, the procedural machinery of consequence clicking into motion around a situation that had been in motion for hours. Nathan stood to one side and let it happen. His ribs had stopped arguing and settled into a steady ache that he'd learned to categorize as background information rather than an active problem. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding at some point while he wasn't paying attention to it. He was tired in a way that was clean rather than complicated. The tired of having done a thing fully and arrived at the end of it. Vasquez cuffed Marcus efficiently, said the required words, and then looked over at Nathan with an expression that contained several things at once: respect and relief, and the particular look of a man who has seen a lot of situations end badly and is finding the experience of one ending otherwise somewhat disorienting. 7:30, Vasquez said. 7:30, Nathan confirmed. Olivia was talking to Fitch, a low, rapid exchange that had the shape of strategic decisions being made in real time, the kind of immediate planning that follows a crisis when you're the person who has to manage the morning after. She had the tablet under her arm and was gesturing with her free hand in the way of someone who is thinking out loud, and even in the specific exhaustion of 11:30 at night, after the evening they'd both been through, she had the quality of forward motion, of a person whose next thought was always about what came next. Nathan sat down on the edge of the demonstration table. Not for dramatic effect, because his ribs had finally accumulated enough consensus votes. He checked his watch. The memo button was still lit. Emma's recorded voice still in the queue, the reminder he hadn't needed about the performance he wasn't going to miss. He didn't play it again. He didn't need to. He knew what it said. Olivia came over to where he was sitting. Fitch had moved off with his phone. The room had thinned out considerably. Marcus was gone. Vasquez's team moving efficiently. The ballroom returning to the strange stillness of a space where something large had happened and was now subsiding. She sat down next to him on the table, which was becoming something of a pattern. He had a back door, she said. He did. Which means our entire security architecture for the past 2 years needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Yes. And the board situation, what he said about Marsh in the private meetings. I have to. One thing at a time, Nathan said. She looked at him sideways. You're telling me to slow down. I'm telling you it's 11:30 and you've had the worst night of your professional life, and the things that need to be done tomorrow will still need to be done tomorrow. She was quiet for a moment. Did you ever think you weren't going to make it out of the server room when it was 3 against 1? He considered the question honestly. I thought it was going to take longer than I wanted, and that I was going to feel it afterward. He moved carefully. I was right on both counts. But you kept going. I had somewhere to be at 10 o'clock. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the assessing look she'd used in the early part of the evening, the executive read of a person as a resource or a variable. Something more direct than that, more personal. "What you did tonight," she started. "Don't," he said, not unkindly. "Nathan." "I noticed something I wasn't supposed to ignore," he said. "I did what I could with it. That's what happened." "That's not all that happened." "It's the version I can live with," he said. "The other version makes it into something I'd have to carry differently." She held his eyes for a moment, and then she nodded once, in the slow way of someone who understands something they might not have understood an hour ago. Outside the ballroom windows, the city was doing what cities do at 11:30 on a weeknight, which was continuing without any awareness of what had happened 42 floors above it. The lights of it lay across the sky in the way that always looked both enormous and, from sufficient height, manageable. Nathan looked at it for a moment. 8 hours until he needed to be at the precinct. Precinct to school was 20 minutes if he took the highway. He'd need to change his shirt. The one he was wearing had blood on the collar and was borrowed anyway, and Paul would probably want it back in better condition than this. He stood up carefully. "I need to find my coat," he said, "and give Vasquez my full contact information, and then I need to go home and get 4 hours of sleep before 7:30. Olivia stood too. She was quiet for a moment with the look of someone who has things they want to say and is deciding which of them belong to tonight and which belong somewhere else. "Will you come back?" she said. "Not tonight, after. Will you—" She stopped, seemed faintly annoyed with herself for the imprecision. "There are things we need to talk about the company, about what comes next. I'll be at the precinct at 7:30, he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her, she looked at him. The honest version of the question was sitting between them, and they both knew it. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come back." She nodded, and he thought, though he wasn't certain because the light was what it was, that what was on her face in that moment was not the composed, managed expression of a CEO managing an outcome. It was something more unguarded than that, something that had more in common with relief than with strategy. He found his coat on the chair where he'd left it 4 hours and several lifetimes ago, and he walked toward the ballroom exit, and behind him the enormous room with its still-lit chandeliers and its overturned evening was quiet in the specific way of places where something real has happened, and the air still remembers it. He pushed through the door and went to find the elevator, because his ribs had filed a formal objection to the stairwell, and for once he was inclined to listen. He got home at 12:41 in the morning. The house was dark except for the porch light, which Nathan had left on out of habit. The habit of a man who had spent enough nights returning to dark houses to understand that a light in the window, even a small one, changed the quality of the return. He sat in his truck for a moment in the driveway before going in, not because he needed to, but because the transition from what the last 4 hours had been to the quiet of an ordinary neighborhood street required a moment of conscious adjustment, the kind of shift you couldn't rush without carrying the wrong thing inside with you. The street was exactly what it always was. 2 houses down, the Pattersons had left their recycling bins out again. The elm tree at the corner was doing the slow thing it did in late autumn, dropping leaves in a way that was going to mean an hour of raking on Saturday. Mrs. Alvarez across the street had her bedroom light on, which meant she was reading, which she did most nights until 2 because she'd told him once that she'd slept badly since her husband died, and reading was the only thing that reliably made her tired. Normal things. Ordinary, unremarkable things that were exactly what they were supposed to be. He went inside. Carol was asleep on the couch with the television running on low, a blanket pulled up to her chin that she definitely hadn't started the evening with, which meant Emma had brought it out to her at some point. He clicked the television off and left Carol a note on the coffee table. "Thank you, I'll bring the good coffee tomorrow," and went down the hallway to Emma's room. He pushed the door open quietly. The flashlight was not in evidence, which either meant she was actually asleep or had heard the truck and performed sleeping with more commitment than usual. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She was on her stomach with one arm hanging off the side of the bed and her hair covering most of her face in the specific chaos of a child who slept the way she did everything else, which was fully and without reservation. The stuffed bear she'd had since she was 1, missing an eye since she was 4, which she'd refused to have repaired on the grounds that he looked more interesting this way, was wedged between her side and the mattress. Nathan stood there longer than was strictly necessary. He was aware, in the way he'd become aware of things over the past 6 years, that moments like this one were not nothing. That they were, in fact, the actual substance of the life he'd chosen when he'd left the other one. Not the dramatic version of it, not the moments that would make a good story, but the plain, unlit version. A kid asleep in a room, a father standing in a doorway. The ordinary weight of a person mattering to another person in the way that doesn't have a name more specific than love. He pulled her door mostly closed and went to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror for the first time in several hours. The butterfly closure had held. The cut above his eye was dark-edged and would be ugly for a week and would scar, as Olivia had noted, which meant he'd have a small story he'd never fully tell embedded in his face for the rest of his life. He looked tired. Older than 37, in the specific way that certain kinds of nights add something to a face that sleep doesn't entirely remove. He changed his shirt, took 2 ibuprofen, set his alarm for 6:15, and was asleep by 1:10. The alarm went off, and he turned it off before it had fully sounded, the way people do when they weren't really sleeping anymore anyway, but were occupying the territory between sleep and waking, where the brain is active but hasn't committed. He lay there for 30 seconds, doing the inventory. Ribs, yes, a solid 7 on a scale that he calibrated differently than most people. Manageable. The cut, tight and hot the way healing things are. The general quality of his body, which had opinions about last night and was expressing them at moderate volume. He got up. He made coffee and eggs and was at the precinct at 7:28, which he considered within the margin. Vasquez looked like a man who had not slept, which was probably accurate. He was in the same clothes as the night before, holding a coffee that appeared to be doing real work, and he greeted Nathan with the particular warmth of a man who has spent a night processing a situation and arrived at a settled appreciation for the person who'd made the outcome possible. The statement took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nathan was thorough. He went through everything sequentially. From the first moment he'd noticed Dietrich turn inward through to the ballroom, the stairwell, the server room, the maintenance corridor, Marcus Grant's return, and the exchange around the tablet. He answered every follow-up question. He provided the phone photographs he'd taken of the network hub and the laminated card. He gave them everything he had, completely and without editing, because the version where you leave things out to protect yourself from procedural inconvenience was not a version he'd ever been comfortable living inside. At 9:43, Vasquez walked him to the precinct door. "We'll need you available for follow-up," Vasquez said. "The federal component is going to complicate things. Whoever commissioned the operation through Marcus Grant, that's not a local case." "I'll be available," Nathan said. "You have all my numbers." "The board member, Marsh." Vasquez kept his voice neutral. "He hasn't been formally contacted yet. That comes later today. Olivia should know before you contact him." "She already does. She called her corporate attorneys at 6 a.m. A pause. "She also called here asking when you'd arrive. Twice." Nathan looked at him. Vasquez had a small private expression on his face that he didn't comment on. "Have a good morning, Mr. Brooks." "Lieutenant?" He made the school in 17 minutes. Chet. The auditorium of Crestwood Elementary was exactly what elementary school auditoriums were. Small and slightly too warm and smelling of industrial floor cleaner, and the particular composite of 60 children who had been excited and nervous since early morning. The folding chairs were arranged in rows with the ruthless optimism of a setup designed to fit more people than the space naturally wanted. Every other chair had a parent in it, or grandparent, or someone's aunt who'd taken a half day from work, and the row of people along the back wall were the ones who'd arrived late or were standing because the chairs were full. Nathan arrived with 4 minutes to spare and found a seat in the third row because a woman with a stroller moved her bag for him in the way that parents at school events move bags for other parents, which was to say automatically and without making it a transaction. The performance was 35 minutes, 4 classes, 7 songs, choreography that ranged from confident to endearing, to one sequence in the middle that clearly had not survived the transition from practice room to actual stage intact and resulted in 3 children briefly facing the wrong direction before a small girl with red barrettes silently communicated the correction through the specific medium of a pointed stare. Emma was in the second row, which confirmed his estimate. She was wearing the blue dress she'd picked out herself 2 weeks ago because she'd declared that the one her teacher had recommended was too scratchy, a description Nathan had found persuasive, and their compromise had been the blue dress with the white collar, which she'd agreed was acceptable. She'd done something to her hair that was different from how it usually looked. Neater, more intentional, the kind of thing an 8-year-old achieves through effort that the 8-year-old in question will never fully acknowledge as effort. She didn't see him when she walked out. She was looking at the stage, checking her position, doing the small mental preparation that performers do in the 30 seconds before the thing starts. The third song was when she found him. She was in the middle of a verse, standing in her spot in the second row, and her eyes moved across the audience in the automatic way of children searching for their person. And then she found him, and something in her face changed in a way that was too quick and too honest to be anything other than what it was, which was relief, and the specific gladness of a person who had expected to look and find no one, and instead found what they were hoping for. She didn't wave. She was in the middle of a performance, and she was 8, not a toddler. But her chin came up a fraction, and her posture adjusted in the way of a person who is standing differently because someone is watching, and Nathan sat in his folding chair in the slightly too warm elementary school auditorium with his cracked ribs and his butterfly-closed eyebrow, and he felt something settle in him that had been unsettled since about 8:47 the previous evening. He clapped at the end of every song. He was not the loudest person in the room, but he was consistent. Emma came out through the side door with the rest of her class 40 minutes later, still in the blue dress, backpack over one shoulder, and she walked toward him with the particular gait of a child who wants to run but has decided running would be too obvious, so she's walking very fast instead. She got to him and said, "You made it." "I said I would." "You say a lot of things." She looked at his face, at the cut specifically. Her expression went through a sequence: surprise, concern, the weighing of how big a deal to make of this. "What happened to your eye?" "Work thing," he said. "The job last night?" "Yes." She stared at the cut for another moment with the focused assessment of a person who is deciding whether to accept an insufficient answer or pursue it further. She was very good at that particular decision-making process. Better than most adults he knew. "Does it hurt?" she said. "A little." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Em." She looked at him for one more second, in the way that children who have been raised by a single parent who occasionally comes home with injuries look at that parent, with a knowledge that exceeds their years and a pragmatism that sits slightly uncomfortably alongside their age. Then she said, "I didn't forget the words to the third song, but Caleb Mortimer definitely did." "I noticed," Nathan said. "He practices, but he gets nervous." She adjusted her backpack strap. "Miss Patterson says that happens to some people." Miss Patterson's right. They walked toward the parking lot. The morning was the kind of mid-autumn morning that couldn't decide between cold and cool and had settled on the thin, clear quality of both. Bright enough to need a squint, still enough to hear the leaves. "Did you eat breakfast?" Emma asked. "Eggs." "Real eggs or the ones from the carton?" "Real ones." She appeared to consider this adequate. They reached the truck, and she climbed in the passenger side with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this their whole life, which she had, and Nathan got in the driver's side and sat for a moment before starting the engine. "You were good up there," he said. She looked at the window. "It was fine. The choreography in the middle was bad." "The choreography in the middle was fine." "It wasn't. We know it wasn't. You don't have to say it was." She looked at him. "I like it better when you just say the true thing." He looked at her for a moment. 8 years old, missing one front tooth that was growing back in at a slight angle that the dentist had said would probably self-correct, sitting in the passenger seat of his truck with her backpack on her lap because she hadn't put it in the back yet. "The third song was the best one," he said. "Your part of the choreography was good. The middle section had some problems that weren't your fault." She nodded, satisfied. "That's what I thought too." He started the truck. 3 weeks passed in the way that weeks pass after something large has happened. Not slowly, not quickly, but with the slightly unreal quality of ordinary time resuming after a rupture. Nathan went back to his contracting schedule. He took Emma to the dentist, confirmed the tooth was self-correcting, raked the leaves on the Saturday he'd planned to rake them. He answered 4 more rounds of follow-up questions from Vasquez and then from 2 federal investigators who arrived in the second week with credentials from an agency that didn't advertise its name on its business cards and questions that were more specific and more informed than Vasquez's, which told him the federal picture was developing faster than the local one. Jeffrey Marsh resigned from the Sterling Dynamics board on a Thursday, citing health reasons, which was the corporate version of a confession that couldn't be prosecuted directly but was understood by everyone in the room to mean exactly what it meant. 2 other board members followed within the week. Olivia stood in front of the company's employees on a Wednesday morning and told them everything: the breach attempt, the internal conspiracy, the surveillance network Marcus had built inside their walls, the board meetings that shouldn't have happened. She did it in a room with 400 employees and a live stream for the rest. And she didn't use corporate language to soften it or legal language to complicate it. She used plain sentences and took questions for 90 minutes and answered the ones she could answer and said clearly which ones she couldn't answer yet. Nathan watched it on his laptop at the kitchen table while Emma was at school. He watched it once, then went back and watched the Q&A, not for the answers, but for the quality of the answers. The way she handled the hard questions, the ones where the true answer wasn't comfortable, the ones where she could have pivoted and didn't. She didn't pivot once. He thought about that for a while after he closed the laptop. The call came on a Friday afternoon, 18 days after the gala. He was in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, having just bought weather stripping for the back door that had been letting cold air in since September, and his phone rang with a number he'd saved 3 weeks ago. "Ms. Hayes," he said. "You can call me Olivia." A pause. "You've been calling me Ms. Hayes in your head this whole time, haven't you?" "Some of the time." "I watched my statement back," she said. "The employee one. I said going forward 4 times. I didn't count." "I counted. It's a habit I'm trying to break." A brief pause that had the texture of someone arriving at the thing they actually called to say. "Are you available to meet?" "Not at the office. Somewhere that's not the site of an attempted corporate takeover." That narrows it down to most places. "There's a coffee place on Alderman Street, Kessler's. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." "Monday at 11? "I'll be there," he said. Kessler's was the kind of coffee shop that had been in the same location for 20 years and showed it. Dark wood, mismatched chairs, a counter that had been refinished once and was due for a second time but hadn't gotten there yet. It smelled like espresso and the particular warm paper smell of a place that also sold used books from a shelf in the back corner. 3 people were working on laptops. A couple near the window was having what appeared to be a serious conversation about something, leaning toward each other with the intensity of people who need to resolve something before they leave. Olivia was already there, at a table in the back left corner, out of the window's sightline, which Nathan noted and appreciated. She had coffee in front of her and looked like a person who had slept better recently than the last time he'd seen her, not entirely rested, but no longer running on a deficit that was actively showing. She was in jeans and a dark sweater, no event clothes, no public face. She looked like herself, which he realized was a thing he was seeing for the first time, because every previous version of her he'd encountered had been the version of Olivia Hayes that existed in a specific professional context, and this one was what was left when those contexts were removed. He sat down. A server appeared, and he ordered coffee without looking at the menu, because he'd been ordering coffee long enough to not need a menu for it. "How are your ribs?" she asked. "Better," he said. "Still there?" "Good that they're better. Unfortunate that they're still there." "That's generally how ribs work." She smiled. The real version of it, the one that used her whole face rather than the managed public variation. "I watched your deposition transcript," she said. "Vasquez shared it with our legal team. You were very thorough." "I try to be." "You also said," she stopped, looked at her coffee cup for a moment, "that your decision to engage when you saw the positioning change was based on, quote, something I wasn't supposed to be able to ignore. The investigator asked you to clarify, and you said, some things don't give you the option of looking away, and then you moved on." He looked at her. "You memorized my deposition transcript?" "Parts of it." "Why?" She considered the question, which was a good sign. It meant she was going to answer it honestly rather than conveniently, because it said something true about you that I'd been trying to find the right language for, she said. And you already had the language. He didn't say anything. I want to offer you a position, she said. Formally, with a proper contract and a salary that reflects what the job actually is. She kept her eyes on his. Head of Executive Protection for Sterling Dynamics. The role Marcus built has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. New structure, new personnel, new protocols. I want someone running it who I already know can't be bought, can't be turned, and notices things nobody else notices. The coffee arrived. Nathan wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking it. I'm not a corporate security executive, he said. No, you're better suited than one. Corporate security executives are good at building systems that look like they work. You're good at seeing through systems that look like they work. She paused. What you did that night, it wasn't just the physical part, though that was, yes, it was extraordinary. It was that you stayed methodical when everything was moving fast. You thought about chain of custody when you were bleeding. You asked me to not tell you something about Marcus Grant because you knew yourself well enough to know you couldn't trust your own judgment in that moment. That last one is not a qualification. It absolutely is, she said. I've worked with people for years who would never admit a limitation in a high-stakes situation because admitting it felt like weakness. You said it plainly because you cared more about the right outcome than about how you appeared. That's actually rare. Nathan looked at his coffee. Outside Kessler's front window, Alderman Street was doing its Monday morning routine. A delivery truck double-parked, a woman with a dog waiting at the corner, a kid on a bike navigating the gap between parked cars with the reckless confidence of someone who has not yet had a reason to be cautious. He thought about what he'd told Emma. I like it better when you just say the true thing. 3 conditions, he said. Olivia didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had expected exactly this and had been waiting to hear what the conditions were. Security risks are reported to you directly and completely, he said. Not filtered through a legal team first, not softened for board consumption. Whatever I find, you hear it exactly as it is, even when it's inconvenient. Agreed. Every major security decision gets independent oversight, not just internal review. External audit with authority to override if the internal process is compromised. We build that into the structure before I start. Also agreed, that's something I would have required regardless. He looked at her. Emma comes first, every time without exception. If there's a school performance or a parent-teacher conference or a dentist appointment, that happens. I'll structure the work around it. I will not structure my daughter around the work. Olivia held his gaze. She didn't answer immediately, and he respected that. She was sitting with it, actually weighing it against the real demands of what the job was, not just performing consideration. That's not how executive protection usually operates, she said. No, it's not. There will be situations that don't care about Emma's schedule. I know. I'll handle them. But the baseline is that she comes first. If you can't agree to that structurally and genuinely, not as a policy statement, but as an actual commitment you'll honor when it's inconvenient, then this doesn't work. She looked at him for a long moment. She's why you do any of it, isn't she? Olivia said. Not a question. Not just tonight, all of it. The work you take, the way you live, the reason you stayed methodical when everything was going wrong in that building. Because losing it would mean losing the version of yourself that she depends on. He didn't answer immediately. She's 8, he said. She notices things. When I'm distracted, when I'm carrying something I haven't dealt with, when I say I'm fine and I'm not fine. She doesn't call me on it directly. She's too smart for that. But she notices. And I owe her a father whose presence is actual presence, not just a body in the right location. Olivia nodded. Slowly. The kind of nod that comes from somewhere real. I agree to all 3 conditions, she said, and I'll put them in the contract language personally, so it's not something that gets negotiated away in the drafting process. He looked at her across the table in the back corner of Kessler's coffee shop, a woman who had spent 3 weeks publicly dismantling the comfortable falsehood her company had been living inside and rebuilding something more honest in its place. And he thought about the quality of the person who does that, who has the option to manage the story and instead just tells it. Some things don't give you the option of looking away. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you'll take it?" "Okay, I'll take it." She exhaled in a way that had more in it than she probably intended to show, and then she picked up her coffee and looked at the table for a moment in the way of someone giving themselves a second to arrive somewhere before moving to the next thing. "The federal investigators," Nathan said. "Where are they on the buyer?" "Getting close. Marcus's cooperation has been thorough. More thorough than his lawyers initially advised, which tells me he made a personal decision separate from the legal strategy." She paused. "I think he meant what he said. About Marsh. About why he built the network. I don't think it makes what he did acceptable, but I think the motivation was real." "It usually is," Nathan said. "That's what makes it complicated." "It's what makes it human," she said. He looked at her. "People do terrible things for reasons that make sense to them," she said. "Not justifiable reasons, but real ones. Marcus convinced himself that the outcome justified the architecture. The architecture required treating people as variables, and that's where it broke down. It always breaks down there. You've been thinking about this. I've had 3 weeks of not sleeping well. You develop theories." She set her cup down. "I've also been thinking about Jeffrey Marsh. He wasn't some villain who woke up one morning and decided to compromise his integrity. He made a series of small decisions, each one a little further from where he'd started, and somewhere in the progression he stopped noticing the distance. That's how it usually goes. Which is why I need someone around me who notices things," she said. "Not just threats. Things. Distances. When something that should bother someone has stopped bothering them." Nathan considered that. "That's a lot to ask of a head of executive protection." "It is," she agreed. "Is it too much?" He thought about standing in a ballroom at 8:47 on an ordinary evening, noticing the angle of a man's shoulders, understanding what that angle meant before anyone else in the room had begun to form the question. He thought about what it cost to act on that kind of noticing. Not physically, though there were costs there too, but the internal cost of being the person who doesn't let themselves look away from the thing they've seen. It was a way of living that was not comfortable. It was demanding and frequently unglamorous, and occasionally put you in a stairwell on the 38th floor with 2 trained people and cracked ribs that were still not entirely forgiven. But it was the only way he knew how to live that fit inside the same space as the other life. The one with the whiteboard note and the flashlight and the stuffed bear missing an eye and the blue dress with the white collar and the performance he'd promised to attend and attended. "No," he said. "It's not too much." He picked Emma up from school that afternoon at 3:15, which was when school ended, which was when he was there, because that was what he'd told her, and that was what happened. She came out through the main doors in the cluster of third graders and found him by the truck and climbed in with her backpack and said, before he'd started the engine, "Do you have a new job?" He looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "You had a phone call on Friday that made you sit in the hardware store parking lot for 20 minutes. I asked Carol and she said she didn't know, but that you were talking to a woman. And then you were different this weekend." Different how? She considered this with the precision she applied to things she'd been thinking about for a while. "Less waiting," she said. "You're usually waiting for something. This weekend you weren't." He sat with that for a moment. 8 years old, with one tooth growing in at a slight angle that was probably going to self-correct, telling him things about himself with the matter-of-fact accuracy of someone who had been paying attention long enough to just know. "I have a new job," he said. "Is it the kind where you come home?" "Every night," he said. "That's one of the conditions." She appeared to find this satisfactory. She put her seatbelt on and looked out the window at the school emptying around them, kids in every direction, backpacks and raised voices, and the chaotic dispersal of 300 people finishing the same thing at the same time. "Is it dangerous?" she said, still looking out the window. He thought about the honest answer, which was that most days it wouldn't be, and that he'd build systems specifically designed to keep the dangerous days from arriving unannounced, and that he'd be working for a woman who'd agreed to oversight and transparency, and who he believed would hold to those commitments when they were inconvenient as well as when they were easy. "It might be sometimes," he said. "I'll be careful." She turned to look at him directly. In the afternoon light, her face was very clear and very young and very old at the same time, the way children's faces are when they've been thinking hard about something real. "You were careful last time," she said, "with the cut on your eye." "I was," he said. "You could have been more careful." "Also true." She looked at him for another second, the weighing look, the noticing look. Then she said, "Okay," and turned back to the window, and he started the truck. They drove home through the afternoon, through the neighborhood that was exactly what it always was, past the elm tree losing its last leaves, past Mrs. Alvarez walking her small dog at the pace of an older woman who is in no particular hurry and sees no reason to be, past the Patterson house where the recycling bins were still, optimistically, in the wrong location. Nathan drove with both hands on the wheel and his daughter in the passenger seat, and the ordinary weight of the afternoon around them. The kind of weight that doesn't get named because it doesn't need to be, because it's just the texture of a life that is going forward. He thought about Rachel, the way he still thought about Rachel. Not the wound version, not the grief that took up all the room, but the version that had settled into something more like a presence. The way you carry someone who is gone not as an absence but as a shape in the room, something you've learned to live alongside rather than in the shadow of. She would have had opinions about this new job. She would have had opinions about Olivia Hayes, expressed directly and probably accurate, and delivered with the specific honesty that had been one of the things he'd loved most and found most difficult about her in equal measure. She would have made him justify the conditions he'd set, pushed at the one about Emma coming first to make sure it was real and not just a thing that sounded right. And he would have been glad to be pushed. He missed her. He would probably always miss her. That was not a problem to be solved. It was just a true thing that lived in him, the way true things do, quietly and permanently. But the missing was not the whole of it anymore. That was the thing that had taken the longest to learn. That grief doesn't vacate to make room for living. You just get bigger around it. You build more of yourself in the space that's left, and eventually the grief is not smaller, but you are larger, and the proportion changes enough to make a difference. Emma was talking about something. A project that was due next week, a disagreement at lunch about something he'd already stopped following the specifics of, a theory she'd developed about why the cafeteria served the thing they called pizza on Mondays, when everyone agreed it wasn't actually pizza. He listened to the texture of it, the movement of her voice, the way she built an argument with 8-year-old logic that was more internally consistent than most adult arguments he heard. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, sat. "Can we have pasta tonight?" Emma said. "We can have pasta tonight. The kind with the breadcrumbs on top." "I know the kind." She got out of the truck and went up the porch steps and waited for him to unlock the door, which she could do herself with her key but didn't when he was there. Some small habit of deference to his presence that he'd never commented on because commenting on it would make it self-conscious and then it would stop. He unlocked the door and she went inside, dropping her backpack in the hallway in the exact location he'd asked her 100 times not to drop it, and he stepped in behind her and pulled the door closed against the cold. The house smelled like the house, the particular combination of things that added up to the place they lived, the coffee from the morning, the old wood of the floors, the faint winter through the windows smell that started in October and didn't leave until March. He hung his keys on the hook by the door. Somewhere in the city, Olivia Hayes was sitting in a building she was remaking from the inside, having conversations that mattered, making decisions that would be difficult and necessary, and that she would make with more transparency than anyone who'd sat in her chair had made them in a long time. She was not a perfect person. She was not a perfect CEO. She was 30 years old and had just had the defining test of her professional life arrive as a crisis she hadn't anticipated. And she'd stood in the middle of it and refused to look away from any of it, and that was not nothing. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Marcus Grant was in the process of telling everything he knew to people with the authority to do something with it. And somewhere above him in the chain, the people who'd commissioned a theft from a charity gala were discovering that the operational distance they'd placed between themselves and the event was not quite sufficient. And somewhere, in the unlocated places where the evidence in Nathan's watch still lived, in a classified file with a 4-letter designation and a chain of names above a wrong intelligence assessment, there were answers he had not pursued and might never pursue because he'd made a choice about who he was going to be, and that choice had a cost, and he decided the cost was worth paying. He didn't know if that made him wise or just practical. He suspected the line between those two things was thinner than most people wanted to admit. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Are you going to stand there or are you going to make pasta?" "I'm going to make pasta," he said. "You're standing there." "I was thinking." "You can think and also make pasta," she said, with the patient specificity of someone correcting an elementary error. "Those are not the same category of thing." "You're right," he said. "They're not." He went into the kitchen and got the pot out and filled it at the sink and put it on the stove, and Emma climbed onto the counter beside him with the casual confidence of someone who had been doing this for years and intended to keep doing it, and she talked about the pizza theory while he got the pasta from the cabinet and the breadcrumbs from the shelf where he always put them. Outside the kitchen window, the street was settling into the blue-gray of late afternoon. The elm on the corner had given up its last leaves. The lights in Mrs. Alvarez's house were coming on in sequence. Living room, then kitchen, then the bedroom at the back where she read until 2 in the morning because sleeping alone was still something she was learning. Nathan stood at the stove in his own kitchen with his daughter talking beside him, and the water was starting to move in the pot, not boiling yet but getting there, and the last thing he felt before the evening simply became, the evening was the specific, grounded thing that has no better name than this. He was exactly where he was supposed to be.